A police officer suspects a black teenager of a crime and begins to follow him. But when he discovers the truth, his world turns upside down. Can he change his perspective and help the one he thought was his enemy? An unexpected alliance reveals shocking secrets and leads to a fight for justice. Subscribe to stay tuned for more stories about prejudice, hope, and change that inspire. Officer Alex Miller had always dreamed of becoming a police officer. From his childhood days spent playing cops and robbers in his suburban neighborhood, he knew he wanted to be on the side of justice. His father, a former Marine, and his mother, a school teacher, had instilled in him a deep sense of duty and discipline. As a young, ambitious officer in his late 20s, Alex now patrolled one of the quieter residential districts in the city, known for its middle-class families, tree-lined streets, and a generally low crime rate. Alex was proud of the work he did. He believed in the importance of preventive policing, stopping crimes before they could happen by keeping a close eye on his beat and establishing strong relationships with the residents. He liked to think of himself as the guardian of the community, someone who would go the extra mile to ensure that people felt safe. He knew almost every resident by name and face, greeting them with a nod or a friendly wave during his daily patrols. Elderly folks often stopped him to chat about local gossip or ask for help with their groceries. Parents nodded approvingly when they saw him near the local elementary school, where he would occasionally step in to direct traffic or just offer a reassuring presence. But lately, Alex's sense of calm had been disturbed. Crime rates in other parts of the city were on the rise. Armed robberies, drug-related incidents, and violent altercations were becoming more frequent. Though his own beat remained relatively peaceful, the tension was palpable. Alex knew that crime had a way of creeping in if left unchecked, and he was determined to prevent that from happening in his district. He began paying closer attention to unfamiliar faces, particularly the teenagers who wandered through the neighborhood. He wasn't naive. He knew how easily young people could be lured into bad decisions. It was during one of these heightened patrols that Alex first noticed him, the teenager with the backpack. He looked about 16, a lanky black boy with a serious expression and a purposeful stride. Alex noticed him one evening while patrolling near the corner of Maple and 8th, an area that bordered a less well-off neighborhood. The boy walked with his head slightly lowered, a worn-out baseball cap pulled low over his forehead, a heavy-looking backpack slung over one shoulder. He seemed nervous, always glancing around, as if expecting something or someone. The boy began appearing regularly, always walking the same route, down Maple Street, then taking a left onto 8th, where he would disappear among the rows of older, somewhat run-down houses. At first, Alex thought it might be nothing, just a kid passing through. But as the days went by, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The boy's routine was too consistent, his behavior too cautious. Alex started to wonder, was he involved in something illegal? Was he a lookout for a gang or a courier for local drug dealers? His instincts told him to find out more. Alex decided to take a closer look, adopting a routine of his own. He began patrolling near the boy's route more frequently, altering his schedule so he could be nearby when the teenager was likely to pass through. He'd park his cruiser a block away, close enough to keep an eye on the boy, but far enough to remain unseen. Each time he saw the boy, he'd note down the time, the route, and any peculiar behavior. It didn't take long for Alex to pick up on more details. The boy always wore the same type of clothes, simple but clean. A faded hoodie, dark jeans, and sneakers that were a bit too big for him. His backpack seemed full, sometimes bulging at odd angles. and he always clutched it close to his body. Despite his seemingly young age, there was a tiredness about him, a kind of weariness in his eyes that didn't match the typical carefree demeanor of a teenager. And he was always looking over his shoulder, always on alert. This vigilance only increased Alex's suspicions. Several times the boy changed his route upon spotting a patrol car, even if it wasn't Alex's. He would cross the street or duck into an alley, disappearing from sight for several minutes before reappearing further down the road. Alex couldn't help but feel that these were not the actions of an innocent person. His curiosity deepened into a sort of fixation. He didn't want to be wrong about this. He didn't want to let something bad happen on his watch. In his downtime, Alex found himself talking about the boy with his colleagues. He didn't reveal all of his suspicions, not wanting to jump to conclusions without evidence, but he did share some of his observations. A few of them agreed that it sounded suspicious, while others shrugged it off as another teenager just trying to avoid the cops. But Alex couldn't let it go. He felt a responsibility to dig deeper. After all, his job wasn't just about reacting to crime. It was about preventing it. Alex began to think back to his training and the times when his instincts had been right in the past. Once he had spotted a man loitering near a convenience store at odd hours. His hunch had led to the discovery of a planned robbery. Another time, he had noticed a car parked in an unusual spot for several nights in a row. It turned out to be connected to a series of home break-ins. In both cases, his attention to detail had saved people from becoming victims. He hoped this situation with the teenager would be no different. Yet there was a part of him that nagged at his conscience. Alex had always prided himself on being a fair officer. He had grown up believing that one should judge a person by their actions, not their appearance. But here he was, making assumptions about a young black kid, largely based on a gut feeling. Was he letting his fear of crime overshadow his commitment to fairness? He pushed these thoughts aside, rationalizing that his duty was to the community, and sometimes that meant following his instincts. One evening, while on his routine watch, Alex's suspicions were further fueled. He saw the boy meeting up with a group of other teenagers near a dilapidated building. They were clustered together, speaking in hushed tones, glancing around nervously. Alex couldn't hear their conversation from where he was, but he could see the exchange of something small, a package maybe. It was too far to tell, but the sight made his heart beat faster. He pulled out his phone and discreetly recorded the scene, zooming in as much as he could without drawing attention to himself. As he watched, the group quickly dispersed, each heading in a different direction. The boy with the backpack took a longer route this time, almost as if he were purposefully avoiding the streets he usually traveled. Alex decided to follow him at a safe distance. The teenager's actions only solidified his belief that something was going on. He had been patient so far, but now he felt a sense of urgency building up inside him. What if this kid was involved in something dangerous? What if someone got hurt because he didn't act? That night, Alex went home but couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the scenes he had witnessed. He knew he needed to be smarter about his next steps. He couldn't just arrest the kid without any real evidence. That would only lead to trouble. He decided he would have to catch him in the act, whatever the act might be. He planned out his next move carefully, deciding to shadow the teenager more closely the next time he saw him. He also started thinking of possible scenarios. What if the boy was indeed a drug courier? Or worse, what if he was being coerced into something he didn't want to do? Alex couldn't shake off the feeling that he was on the brink of uncovering something bigger than just a delinquent teenager. He decided that the next time he saw the boy, he would follow him all the way, even if it meant going beyond the usual boundaries of his patrol route. With his mindset, Alex prepared himself for the next day's patrol. Little did he know, the truth he would uncover would challenge everything he thought he knew about his job, his community, and himself. The next day, Alex was ready. He had decided to take his surveillance of the teenager, whom he now referred to as the kid with the backpack, to the next level. He arrived at his usual patrol area earlier than usual, parking his cruiser in a spot that offered a good view of the street, but kept him out of sight. He knew that catching the boy involved a delicate balance. He couldn't be too obvious, but he couldn't afford to lose track of him either. This wasn't an official operation, so Alex had to be discreet. He couldn't exactly call for backup or use department resources for what, on paper, seemed like a simple hunch. Alex's heartbeat quickened when he finally spotted the boy. Just like clockwork, he appeared on Maple Street, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Today, however, the boy seemed more cautious than usual. His head swiveled left and right, his eyes scanning the street. Alex tensed up. Had the kid noticed him before? Was he onto Alex's quiet surveillance? The officer decided to stay back even further, giving the boy plenty of space while keeping a line of sight. As the boy continued down Maple Street, he made his usual left onto 8th. Alex followed at a distance, parking his car and continuing on foot. He moved carefully, making sure to stay in the shadows of buildings, using trees and parked cars as cover. As he walked, Alex felt a rush of adrenaline. This was what he had trained for, real police work, the kind that gets your blood pumping. He felt more alive than he had in months. The boy's behavior today was more erratic. Instead of his usual brisk walk, he slowed down near an alleyway, peering into the shadows as if checking for something or someone. Alex pressed himself against the brick wall of a nearby building, his eyes fixed on the boy. He watched as the kid continued his cautious walk and then ducked into an alley that led toward an old warehouse district. This was new. Alex's suspicions surged. Was this where the boy was meeting his contacts? Was he about to make a drop? Alex moved quickly but silently, keeping his distance as he approached the mouth of the alley. The buildings in this part of town were older, some abandoned, others repurposed into cheap storage spaces. The alley itself was narrow, littered with old newspapers, broken glass, and the occasional rat scurrying away from the sudden noise of footsteps. Alex's senses were on high alert. He could hear the boy's footsteps echoing softly, but they were slowing down. Crouching behind a dumpster, Alex peered around the corner. He could see the boy now, standing at the far end of the alley, his head craned to the side, as if listening for something. Then, Alex noticed it, a small, unmarked van, parked just beyond the alley. Two men stood near it, one smoking a cigarette, the other leaning against the van with a bored expression. The boy hesitated for a moment, then cautiously approached them. Alex's heart was pounding in his chest. Was this it? Was he about to witness a drug deal or a handoff of stolen goods? He strained to hear what was being said, but he was too far away. All he could see was the body language, the boy shifting nervously from foot to foot, one of the men gesturing impatiently. Then, the man with the cigarette reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A vial? A bag? Alex couldn't tell from his position. Suddenly, a loud noise broke the tension. A stray cat knocked over a trash can further down the alley, startling everyone. The men by the van looked around, their eyes narrowing as they scanned the surroundings. The boy took a step back, clearly spooked. Alex cursed under his breath. He needed to act fast, but he also needed to be smart. He stayed hidden, waiting for the right moment. The men seemed on edge now, more alert. The one with the cigarette muttered something to the other, who nodded and began to approach the alley where Alex was hiding. Realizing he might be discovered, Alex made a split-second decision. He had to back off, at least for now. Slowly, he began to retreat, moving as silently as he could back toward the street. He kept his eyes on the man approaching the alley, his hand instinctively moving toward the holster on his hip. Just as he was about to turn the corner and get out of sight, his radio crackled to life. The noise was faint, but in the stillness of the alley, it sounded like a thunderclap. The man in the alley stopped dead, his eyes narrowing. Alex ducked behind a dumpster, holding his breath. He could hear the man's footsteps getting closer. His mind raced. If he got caught now, he'd have a lot of explaining to do. Not just to his superiors, but to himself. He'd have to justify why he was sneaking around in an alley without any backup or warrant. The footsteps grew louder, each one echoing like a drumbeat in Alex's ears. He reached for his radio, quickly turning the volume down, and held his breath. His fingers were tense on the grip of his sidearm, ready for anything. But then, just as quickly as they had approached, the footsteps stopped. Alex listened intently. The man muttered something under his breath, then turned back toward the van. A wave of relief washed over Alex, but he stayed put, not wanting to make any sudden moves. He watched as the men spoke with the boy for a few more moments, then abruptly waved him off. The boy, clearly shaken, hurried back up the alley and out into the main street. Alex remained hidden until he was sure the coast was clear. Then, he slowly made his way back to his cruiser, all the while keeping a careful eye on the van. He watched as it drove off, disappearing into the maze of city streets. His mind was racing. What had just happened? Who were those men? And what did they want with the boy? He needed to find out more. That night, back at the precinct, Alex found himself deep in thought. He went over the events of the day in his mind, trying to piece together what he had seen. He replayed the scene in the alley over and over, scrutinizing every detail. There was something there. He was sure of it, but he also couldn't shake off the feeling that he might be on the wrong track. What if he was misreading the situation? What if he was wrong about the kid? He decided to dig deeper. Using the police database, he looked up recent reports in the area surrounding the warehouse district. There had been a few mentions of suspicious activity, but nothing concrete, just vague complaints of loitering, a few noise disturbances. Still, it was enough to make him think there could be more going on beneath the surface. He pulled up the boy's description in the system, but found nothing. No prior arrests, no known affiliations with any gangs or criminal organizations. Alex sat back in his chair, frustration building inside him. He knew he was walking a fine line. On one hand, he didn't want to let a potential crime go unchecked. On the other hand, he didn't want to be the kind of cop who harassed kids just because they looked suspicious. He thought about his father, a stern but fair man, who had always taught him to look deeper, to see beyond the surface. Was he doing that now? Or was he falling into the trap of his own biases? The next day, Alex decided to try a different approach. Instead of following the boy directly, he would focus on gathering more information about the area he frequented, the warehouse district, and the surrounding neighborhoods. He talked to a few local shop owners, casually asking if they had seen anything unusual or if they knew anything about the boy. Most didn't have much to say, but a few mentioned seeing him around the hospital late at night. That piqued Alex's interest. Why would the boy be near the hospital at odd hours? He decided to check it out for himself. That evening, after his shift, Alex drove to the hospital and parked a few blocks away. He waited, watching the entrance and the surrounding area. Sure enough, just as he was about to give up and call it a night, he spotted the boy slipping through a side entrance, his backpack still slung over his shoulder. Alex's curiosity burned. He waited for a few minutes, then quietly followed the same path. Inside, he found himself in a dimly lit corridor. The hospital was still busy, but this part seemed quieter, almost deserted. He carefully made his way through the maze of hallways, his eyes scanning for any sign of the boy. Then, he saw him, dressed in a simple uniform, pushing a cart laden with trays of food. For a moment, Alex was taken aback. Was the boy working here? He watched as the teenager knocked on a door and entered a patient's room, leaving a tray of food before moving on to the next. Alex followed at a distance, staying out of sight. He watched the boy work his way through several rooms, sometimes chatting with the patients, sometimes just moving silently. There was a gentleness in his demeanor, a quiet resolve that Alex hadn't expected. It was then that Alex realized the truth. This boy wasn't a criminal or a lookout for a gang. He was working late shifts at the hospital, likely trying to earn money. Alex's suspicions began to crumble, replaced by a sense of guilt. He had been so quick to judge, so certain that this kid was up to no good, that he hadn't even considered other possibilities. His thoughts were interrupted as he saw the boy head towards an exit. Alex decided it was time to talk. Alex waited until the boy had finished his shift and was heading out the side door. He approached him carefully, not wanting to startle him. "Hey," he called softly, his hands visible and non-threatening. The boy turned, his eyes wide with surprise and a hint of fear. "I've seen you around," Alex continued. "I wanted to talk. I think I might owe you an apology." The boy looked skeptical, but didn't run. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice guarded. "I'm Officer Miller," Alex said, showing his badge but keeping his tone gentle. "And I've been watching you, trying to figure out what you were up to. I thought you might be doing something illegal." The boy's face tightened. "Because I'm black," he shot back, his eyes narrowing. There was pain there, anger too, but mostly it was exhaustion. Alex felt a pang of shame. Maybe. I don't know," he admitted. "I was wrong. I see that now. I just wanted to understand." For a moment, there was silence between them. Then the boy sighed. "My name's Marcos," he said quietly. "I'm just trying to make it, man. My mom, she's sick. I'm working here at night, and I go to school during the day. I don't have time to get in trouble, even if I wanted to." Alex nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the boy's words. He felt a mixture of relief, regret, and a growing sense of respect for this teenager who was carrying so much more than he'd realized. "I'm sorry, Marcos," he said sincerely. "I really am. If there's anything I can do to help, I'd like to make it right." Marcos looked at him for a long moment, his expression softening slightly. "We'll see," he replied, his tone cautious but not unkind. "But thanks for being straight with me." As Alex watched Marcos walk away into the night, he realized that his perspective had shifted. He had judged without knowing, acted without understanding, and now he had a chance to do better. After his conversation with Marcos, Alex couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that had settled in his chest. His thoughts were consumed by the young boy's words, the weariness in his eyes, and the stark reality of his life. He had been so quick to judge, so sure of his own instincts, that he hadn't considered the possibility that Marcos might be just another kid trying to make ends meet. Alex knew he needed to dig deeper, not only to understand Marcos' situation, but to make amends for his own misguided suspicions. The following day, Alex made a decision. He would follow Marcos again, not out of suspicion this time, but out of a genuine desire to understand his reality. He needed to see the full picture to figure out how he could help. That evening, he set up his patrol as usual. But this time, his perspective had changed. He wasn't looking for a criminal. He was trying to understand a kid's life, the choices he made, and the paths he was forced to walk. As the sun dipped below the skyline, Alex saw Marcos appear on his usual route, walking with the same worn backpack slung over his shoulder. Tonight, Marcos seemed even more tired, his steps heavier, his eyes downcast. Alex watched from a distance as the boy made his way to the back entrance of the city hospital. This time, Alex didn't wait long before following him inside. He wanted to see more of what Marcos did here. Inside the hospital, Alex navigated the quiet, dimly lit hallways, trying to keep a low profile. He saw Marcos enter a small staff room where he changed into his delivery uniform, a simple set of scrubs with a name tag clipped on. Alex found a corner where he could watch without being seen. For the next few hours, he observed Marcos as he moved through the hospital, delivering trays of food to patients and engaging in brief but kind conversations with them. There was a gentleness in the way Marcos spoke to the elderly patients, his voice soft, his demeanor calm. He'd smile and listen to their stories, nodding along, offering comfort with his presence alone. One elderly woman, in particular, seemed to light up when Marcos entered her room. She called him "my sweet boy," and he responded with a warm smile. Alex noticed how Marcos lingered there a little longer than in the other rooms, listening patiently to her stories about her late husband and children. As Alex continued to observe, he realized that Marcos wasn't just doing this job for the money. He was doing it because he cared. This realization hit Alex hard. Here was a kid, burdened with responsibilities, duties that many adults would find overwhelming. Yet he was handling it all with grace and compassion. For a moment, Alex felt ashamed. He had spent days surveilling this boy, assuming the worst, while Marcos was out here doing more good than most people, Alex knew. After several hours of watching, Alex decided it was time to approach Marcos again. But this time, he wanted to learn more. He waited until Marcos had a break, catching him near the vending machines in a quiet corner of the hospital. Marcos, tired and looking a bit wary, glanced up and recognized him. "Officer Miller," he greeted with a sigh. "You're still following me, huh?" Alex raised his hands defensively. "Not like before," he replied. "I wanted to understand, and I've seen a lot tonight. You do good work here, Marcos." Marcos seemed surprised by the compliment, but remained guarded. "I do what I have to do," he said quietly, pressing a button on the vending machine and waiting for his soda to drop. "It's not like I have a choice," Alex nodded. "I get that, but I still want to know more, if you're willing to share." For a moment, there was silence. Then, perhaps out of exhaustion or a need to be heard, Marcos began to speak. "My mom's sick," he started, his voice low. "Real sick. She's got this condition. Doctors don't know if she'll ever get better. She needs these expensive meds and treatments, and with my dad gone, it's just me." Alex listened intently, his heart sinking as he imagined what it must be like for a teenager to shoulder such a burden. "What about school?" he asked gently. "You manage both?" Marcos nodded, taking a sip of his soda. "Yeah, I go to school during the day and work here at night. Sometimes I sleep a couple of hours, but mostly I'm just running on fumes." His eyes were hollow, and the fatigue in his voice was palpable. "But why all the secrecy?" Alex pressed. "You seem like you were always hiding or avoiding us." Marcos shrugged. "People see a black kid walking around at night with a backpack. They make assumptions. I've been stopped before, treated like a suspect. I figured it's better to keep a low profile, stay out of trouble. But it's hard, you know." Alex nodded slowly, understanding now why the boy had acted the way he did. "I'm sorry, Marcos. I was one of those people making assumptions. I want to make it right." Marcos studied him for a moment, his eyes wary but thoughtful. "How?" Alex took a deep breath. "Tell me about the men I saw you with the other night, the ones by the van. What's that about?" Marcos looked down, his expression clouding with a mix of frustration and fear. "I don't know exactly who they are. They showed up a few weeks ago. I think they're looking for someone, and they keep asking questions about me and my route. They said they could make things easier for me if I helped them out. But I don't want any part of whatever they're doing." Alex felt a knot form in his stomach. This was worse than he thought. "And you're sure they haven't threatened you?" Marcos shook his head. "Not directly, but they're persistent. I don't want any trouble. I have enough on my plate. Alex knew he had to dig deeper. These men could be dangerous, and Marcos could be caught in the middle of something he didn't want to be part of. Look, I can help you, but I need more information. Can you describe them? Did they say anything specific that seemed off? Marcos thought for a moment. The one with the cigarette, he seemed like the boss. Kept talking about opportunities and how he could protect me. But it didn't feel right. And the other guy, he was quieter, but he kept watching me, like really watching. It made my skin crawl. Alex nodded, taking mental notes. Okay, Marcos, I'll look into it, but in the meantime, keep your head down and try to avoid them. If they approach you again, let me know. Marcos looked at him, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. You really mean that? You're not just saying it? Alex smiled slightly. I mean it. I've got your back. The next day, Alex decided to take action. He couldn't handle this alone, and he knew it. He reached out to his precinct's community liaison officer, Officer Jenny Reyes. She was known for her work with at-risk youth and had a reputation for being both tough and compassionate, a balance Alex admired. Jenny, Alex began, after they sat down in the break room, I've got a situation, and I need your help. Jenny looked up from her coffee, raising an eyebrow. What kind of situation? Alex explained everything. His initial suspicions about Marcos, what he had learned about the boy's situation, and the recent encounters with the suspicious men. Jenny listened carefully, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as he spoke. Sounds like this kid is caught in a tough spot, she said finally. And these guys, they could be anything from small-time crooks to something bigger. You did the right thing bringing this to me. Alex felt a surge of relief. So what do you think we should do? Jenny leaned back in her chair, thinking. First, we need to find out who these guys are. I'll pull some strings. See if we have any intel on similar patterns. Guys approaching kids, trying to recruit them or scare them. In the meantime, keep close to Marcos. Let him know we're on his side. Alex nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. I've already told him I'm here to help. I think he believes me, but he's wary. Can't blame him. Jenny smiled. He's a smart kid. Just keep being straight with him. Trust is a two-way street. Over the next few days, Alex continued his patrols. But now he had a clearer goal in mind. He kept an eye on the areas where he had seen the van and the men, hoping to catch another glimpse of them. At the same time, he made it a point to check in with Marcos whenever he could, letting him know he wasn't alone in this. Marcos, for his part, seemed more at ease around Alex now. They had a few more conversations, sometimes about serious things, like his mother's condition, and other times about lighter topics, sports, music, and school. Alex learned that Marcos was smart and determined, but also tired. Tired in a way that went beyond just the lack of sleep. It was the kind of tired that came from carrying too much for too long. One afternoon, Jenny came back with news. We've got a hit, she said, handing Alex a folder. There's been a string of similar incidents across the city. Men fitting that description approaching young kids, mostly minorities, trying to get them involved in petty crimes or worse. It's low-level gang activity, but these guys are dangerous. They prey on kids who don't have a lot of options. Alex's jaw tightened, and they're targeting Marcos because they think he's vulnerable. Jenny nodded. Exactly. We need to act fast, Alex. We can't let them get to him. That evening, Alex and Jenny set up a stakeout near the alley where Alex had first seen the van. They waited in silence, the tension thick in the air. Hours passed, and just when they were about to call it a night, they spotted it, the same unmarked van, pulling into the alley. Two men got out, just like before. One lit a cigarette, while the other stood back, scanning the area. Alex's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. He was ready. He looked at Jenny, who gave him a nod. They moved in, staying low, using the shadows for cover. They could hear the men talking now. Something about setting up a meeting and the kid being ripe for the picking. Alex's blood boiled. He knew they were talking about Marcos. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed down the alley. Alex's eyes widened as he saw Marcos approaching, his face tense but determined. "No," Alex whispered. "Not now, kid." Marcos stopped a few feet away from the men, his hands clenched into fists. "I told you before, I'm not interested," he said loudly, his voice steady despite the fear Alex knew he must be feeling. And the man with the cigarette smirked, taking a drag. "Oh, come on, kid. We're just trying to help you out. You're working too hard. We could make things a lot easier for you." Marcos shook his head. "I'm doing fine on my own." The men exchanged a glance, and the smirk faded. The second man took a step closer, his face hardening. "Listen, kid, we're not asking." That was the moment Alex decided to make his move. He stepped out from behind the cover, his hand on his weapon. "That's enough," he said, his voice firm. "This ends here." The men turned, startled. The one with the cigarette dropped it, his eyes narrowing. "Who the hell are you?" Jenny appeared behind Alex, her badge raised. "Police, and you're about to make a big mistake if you don't back off." For a moment, it seemed like the men might fight. But then, seeing they were outnumbered, they backed down, muttering curses under their breath. They climbed back into the van and sped off, disappearing into the night. Marcos let out a shaky breath, his shoulders slumping in relief. Alex approached him, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You okay?" Marcos nodded, his eyes still wide with adrenaline. "Yeah. Thanks. I didn't think they'd back off like that." Jenny chuckled. "They know when they're beat. But we'll keep an eye out for them. You just keep doing what you're doing, Marcos." That night marked a turning point for Alex, for Marcos, and for the community. It wasn't just about stopping those men. It was about showing Marcos that he wasn't alone, that there were people who cared, who were willing to stand up for him. For Alex, it was a lesson in humility, in understanding the complexities of the lives he had sworn to protect. And as they walked away from that alley, Alex knew one thing for sure. He would never judge a book by its cover again. The night had been a whirlwind of emotions for Alex, Marcos, and even Jenny as they left the tense alleyway confrontation behind. Alex knew that this was only the beginning of a deeper conversation he needed to have with Marcos. He needed to build trust and show that he was committed to helping him. As they parted ways that night, Alex suggested they meet again soon, somewhere more private, somewhere they could talk openly. Marcos hesitated but eventually agreed. He gave Alex a tired nod, and they decided to meet the next evening at a small cafe near the hospital. It was quiet, a place where they wouldn't be interrupted or overheard. For Alex, it was a chance to make amends and learn more about Marcos's life. For Marcos, it was an opportunity to see if he could truly trust this police officer who, just a few days ago, had been following him like a suspect. The following day, Alex couldn't stop thinking about their upcoming meeting. His mind was filled with thoughts of how to approach the conversation, how to convey sincerity without coming off as condescending or forceful. He wanted to be careful, to listen more than he spoke, to make sure Marcos felt heard. He went over everything he knew about the boy, his sick mother, his job at the hospital, the relentless hours he put in, and the men who had tried to recruit him. The picture was becoming clearer, but there were still gaps. Alex needed to understand the full extent of what Marcos was dealing with. As he prepared, he also took time to reach out to some community resources. He contacted a local support group for families dealing with medical crises and spoke to a social worker who specialized in helping teens in difficult situations. He wanted to be ready to offer real, tangible support to Marcos, not just empty promises. When evening came, Alex arrived at the cafe a bit early, taking a seat in a corner booth where they would have some privacy. He ordered a coffee and waited, his eyes occasionally drifting to the door. A few minutes later, he saw Marcos walk in, his posture tense and his eyes scanning the room. When he spotted Alex, he seemed to relax slightly, making his way over and sitting down across from him. "Hey," Alex greeted, trying to keep his tone casual. "Hey," Marcos replied, his voice still guarded, but not as cold as it had been before. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the cafe filling the air. Alex decided to break the ice. "I appreciate you coming. I know it's not easy to trust someone like me after everything." Marcos shrugged. "I guess I wanted to see what you had to say." Alex nodded. "Fair enough. I want to be straight with you, Marcos. I've been in law enforcement for a while now, and I've seen a lot. But I've also made mistakes, like with you. I jumped to conclusions, and I'm sorry for that." Marcos looked at him, his expression unreadable. "Why do you think I was up to something?" Alex took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I saw you walking the same routes, looking over your shoulder, avoiding patrol cars. I've seen that kind of behavior before, and it usually means something's going on. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment." Marcos's eyes softened a bit, but his guard was still up. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. I know that now," Alex said earnestly. "And I'm here to understand more about what you're going through. You've got a lot on your plate: school, work, your mom's health. I want to help if I can." Marcos was silent for a moment, his eyes focused on the table in front of him. Alex could see the conflict in his expression, the desire to open up versus the fear of being vulnerable, especially to someone in a uniform. Finally, he spoke. It's hard, you know," Marcos began, his voice low. "I've been doing this for a while now, trying to keep things together. My mom, she's been sick for almost 2 years. It's just me taking care of her." Alex listened intently, nodding for him to continue. "Dad left when I was 12, Marcos continued, his tone flat, as if he had told the story 100 times before. "He just walked out. Mom got sick a few years after that, and everything went downhill. I had to start working to help pay for her meds and treatments. The bills keep piling up. I had to drop out of most of my after-school stuff. No time, no money." Alex could feel the weight of Marcos's words. It was more than just the exhaustion in his voice. It was the burden of responsibility, of growing up too fast. "That's a lot for anyone, let alone a teenager," Alex said softly. "How do you manage?" Marcos shrugged again, his eyes still downcast. "You just do. I don't have a choice. I go to school because I have to graduate. I work nights because we need the money. It's like I'm always on this tightrope, and if I mess up even a little, everything comes crashing down." Alex felt a pang of empathy. He had seen this kind of resilience before, but never so up close. "And what about those men, the ones in the alley?" Marcos's expression hardened. "I don't know what they want. They said they could help, but I don't trust them. They kept trying to push me, saying they could make things easier if I helped them out. But I know that's not the kind of help I need." Alex nodded, his respect for Marcos growing with each passing moment. "You're smart not to trust them. And you're right, they're not offering real help. But I am. I've talked to some people. There are programs, support groups, and resources that could help you and your mom. I'm not saying it'll solve everything overnight, but it's a start." Marcos looked skeptical but interested. "Like what?" "Well," Alex began, "there's a local organization that provides financial assistance and resources for families dealing with medical crises. They can help with medical bills, finding affordable medication, and even legal advice if needed. There's also a support network for teens like you, kids who have a lot on their plate. You'd have people who understand what you're going through. Marcos considered this for a moment. And what's in it for you? Alex smiled faintly. Nothing. I just want to make things right. You deserve better than what you've been dealt. There was a long pause as Marcos weighed his options. Finally, he nodded slowly. Okay, I'll think about it. Over the next few weeks, Alex and Marcos continued to meet regularly, sometimes at the cafe, other times in the park, or even during Alex's patrols. Each time they talked more, their conversations deepening as they got to know each other better. Marcos opened up more about his life, his dreams of becoming an engineer, his frustration with the system that seemed stacked against him, and his hopes for his mother's recovery. Alex, in turn, shared his own stories, his reasons for becoming a police officer, his own struggles with the pressures of his job, and the mistakes he had made along the way. It was a two-way street, and slowly, a bond began to form between them. One day, as they sat in the park, Alex brought up the idea of joining a youth mentorship program. It's not just for troubled kids, he explained. It's for anyone who wants to learn, grow, and get support. I think you'd be great at it. You've got a good head on your shoulders, Marcos. And you've got a lot to teach others. Marcos chuckled softly. Me? A mentor? Why not? Alex said, smiling. You're already doing more than most people your age. You've got experience. Real, lived experience. That's valuable. Marcos seemed to consider it. Maybe. I guess it wouldn't hurt to check it out. As their friendship grew, Alex began to see his job differently. He realized how much his perspective had been shaped by assumptions. Assumptions about race, about poverty, about what it meant to be a cop in this city. Marcos had opened his eyes to a side of the community he hadn't fully understood before. One evening, as they were wrapping up another conversation, Marcos said something that stuck with Alex. You know, I used to hate cops, he admitted, his tone matter-of-fact. All I saw was what they did to people like me. But you're different. You actually listen. Alex felt a lump form in his throat. I'm trying, Marcos. I really am. Marcos nodded. I see that. Just keep doing what you're doing. It was a simple statement, but it meant the world to Alex. He knew he still had a lot to learn, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. As things seemed to be settling into a new normal, a new challenge loomed on the horizon. One day, Marcos came to Alex with a worried look on his face. I saw those guys again, he said, his voice tense. The ones from the alley. They've been hanging around the hospital. I think they're still watching me. Alex's expression hardened. Did they approach you? Marcos shook his head. Not yet. But I don't like it. I feel like they're waiting for something. Alex knew they couldn't afford to let their guard down. Okay, we'll handle this. I'll talk to Jenny, and we'll figure out our next move. But in the meantime, keep your distance from them. Don't engage. Marcos nodded, but Alex could see the worry in his eyes. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Determined to protect Marcos and his family, Alex reached out to the community even more. He contacted local neighborhood watch groups, informed them about the suspicious men, and asked them to be vigilant. He also coordinated with Jenny and the precinct to increase patrols around the hospital and Marcos's neighborhood, hoping to deter any further attempts by the men to contact him. Meanwhile, the support group Alex had mentioned to Marcos was already in motion. With some guidance, Marcos and his mother were beginning to see a bit of relief. The local organization helped cover some of the outstanding medical bills and provided them with a volunteer who visited regularly to assist with day-to-day needs. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step in the right direction. One afternoon, Alex got a call from Jenny. I've been talking to a friend over at the community center, she said. They're looking for someone to help with their after-school program. Someone who can connect with the kids, be a positive influence. I think Marcos would be perfect for it. Alex grinned. I think you're right. I'll talk to him. When Alex brought up the opportunity to Marcos, the boy seemed hesitant at first. "I don't know," he said. "I've never done anything like that before." "You've been doing it this whole time," Alex countered. "Just by being you. These kids need someone who gets it, someone who's been where they are. You could make a real difference." After a moment, Marcos nodded. "Okay, I'll give it a shot." With every step forward, Marcos was building a new path for himself, a path that wasn't determined by circumstance, but by choice. And Alex was right there with him, learning, growing, and making amends for his own past mistakes. They were a team now, not just in facing down the threats that still loomed, but in building something better for the future. The chapter ended on a note of cautious optimism. There were still battles to be fought, still challenges to overcome. But for the first time, both Alex and Marcos felt like they had a fighting chance. And that, more than anything, was worth believing in. In the days that followed, a noticeable shift began to occur in the neighborhood and the lives of both Marcos and Alex. Their collaboration and developing friendship started to ripple outward, influencing the broader community. With the increasing threats from the suspicious men hanging around the hospital, Alex and Jenny knew they needed to act swiftly and thoughtfully to protect Marcos and others like him from becoming targets. But beyond just addressing this immediate threat, Alex wanted to leverage the situation to create a more significant change in the community. Alex knew that in order to protect Marcos and others like him, they would need more than just increased patrols and watchful eyes. They needed community involvement. Drawing from his newfound awareness of the power of local support networks, Alex began organizing a series of community meetings. He reached out to local leaders, neighborhood watch coordinators, teachers, and even some of the youth who frequented the area. "We need to make sure everyone knows what's going on," he told Jenny during one of their planning sessions. "These guys are trying to take advantage of vulnerable kids like Marcos. If we get the whole community involved, we can make it clear they're not welcome here." Jenny nodded in agreement. "It's going to take time, but we can make this work. The more people who know what's happening, the safer Marcos and other kids will be." At the first community meeting, Alex stood in front of a packed room at the local community center. Parents, local business owners, and even a few concerned teenagers had gathered to hear what he had to say. Marcos was there too, sitting in the back, his face partially hidden under a hoodie. Alex appreciated his presence. It showed that he was willing to be part of the solution. "Thank you all for coming," Alex began, his voice steady. "I know it's not easy to hear that there are people trying to take advantage of our kids. But we need to face this together. These men are out there, trying to manipulate and scare our youth into making bad choices. We need to be vigilant, but more than that, we need to be united." The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement. Alex continued, outlining the plan: increased neighborhood patrols, a coordinated watch system where community members could report suspicious activity, and a series of workshops for parents and youth on how to recognize and resist coercion and manipulation. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Several parents volunteered to join the neighborhood watch, and a local business owner offered to fund the printing of informational pamphlets to distribute around the area. Others suggested starting after-school programs and mentorship initiatives to keep kids engaged and off the streets. "We have to show these kids that there are other paths, better paths," said Mrs. Roberts, a retired teacher who had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years. "We can't just tell them to stay away from trouble. We have to give them somewhere else to go." Marcos, who had been quietly listening from the back, raised his hand hesitantly. I think we need to make sure the kids know they're not alone," he said, his voice wavering at first, but growing stronger as he spoke. Sometimes it feels like nobody cares, but if they see that people are actually looking out for them, it could make a big difference. Alex smiled, nodding in support. Exactly, Marcos. That's why we're here, to show that we care and to provide real support. The meeting ended on a hopeful note, with a sense of determination filling the room. People lingered afterward, talking in small groups, exchanging ideas and offering help. For the first time in a while, Alex felt like they were making real progress, creating a community that could stand together against any threat. Over the next few weeks, the effects of the community meetings became evident. Patrols were increased, and the neighborhood watch program expanded, with members taking turns patrolling during peak hours and reporting any suspicious activities. Local organizations began offering workshops and activities for the youth, giving them safe spaces to gather and positive role models to look up to. Alex and Marcos continued to work together closely. Marcos became increasingly involved in the efforts to protect the community, offering insights and helping to bridge the gap between the officers and the younger members of the neighborhood. One afternoon, as they walked together after another successful meeting, Marcos turned to Alex and asked, "Do you really think this is going to work? I mean, all of it?" Alex considered the question carefully before answering. "I think it already is working. Look around. People are talking to each other more, looking out for one another. Kids like you are stepping up, showing that they want something better. That's a good start." Marcos nodded, his face thoughtful. "I guess. I just hope it's enough." Recognizing the need for more comprehensive support, Alex and Jenny reached out to social services and nonprofit organizations focused on family support, mental health, and youth development. They knew that real, lasting change couldn't happen with just police work. It needed to involve the right kind of social support. Together, they organized a new initiative, a task force made up of community leaders, social workers, mental health professionals, and law enforcement. The goal was to create a multifaceted approach to address the underlying issues: poverty, lack of resources, and limited access to education and health care that made kids like Marcos vulnerable in the first place. Marcos was invited to join the meetings, not just as a participant, but as a voice for the youth who needed help the most. At first, he was hesitant. "I'm just a kid," he said to Alex. "What do I know about any of this?" "You know more than most," Alex encouraged him. "You've lived it. Your voice matters." Slowly, Marcos began to find his footing. He spoke about the challenges faced by kids in his situation, how hard it was to stay on the right path when it seemed like every option was stacked against you. His words resonated, and the more he spoke, the more people listened. Jenny, who had been instrumental in organizing the community and reaching out to social services, was deeply invested in the outcome. She had seen too many kids fall through the cracks and was determined not to let that happen again. She personally took on the role of liaising between the police and the community, ensuring that communication remained open and transparent. During one of their task force meetings, Jenny brought up the importance of mentorship programs. "We need to pair these kids with mentors who understand what they're going through," she said. "People who can guide them, support them, and most importantly, show them that there are better options out there." The idea quickly gained traction, and soon a network of volunteers, retired teachers, local business owners, college students, and even some police officers signed up to be mentors. Alex, inspired by the idea, volunteered to be a mentor himself. "I've learned a lot from Marcos," he admitted to the group, "and I'd like to keep learning. If there's anything I can do to help, I'm all in." Marcos, too, began to take on more responsibility. He started speaking at the workshops and meetings, sharing his story and encouraging other kids to stay away from the temptations that could lead them down the wrong path. He even began mentoring some of the younger kids, becoming a role model in his own right. "You've got a gift, you know," Alex told him one day after a workshop. "People listen to you. They respect you because you're real with them." Marcos smiled, a bit shyly. "I guess I just want them to know they're not alone," Alex nodded. "That's exactly what they need to hear." Despite the positive changes, the presence of the men who had approached Marcos still loomed like a dark cloud. They hadn't been seen in a few weeks, but their absence only made Alex more nervous. Were they biding their time, waiting for the right moment to strike again? He and Jenny continued to keep their ears to the ground, listening for any chatter about their whereabouts or plans. Then, one day, they got a break. A local shop owner reported seeing the men near an abandoned building on the edge of town. It was a known spot for illegal activity, and Alex immediately felt a sense of urgency. They needed to act quickly to ensure they didn't lose this opportunity to catch the men before they could cause more harm. "We need to move on this," Alex said to Jenny. "We can't let them think they can come back here and do whatever they want." Jenny nodded. "Agreed. Let's get a team together and see if we can flush them out." The next day, Alex, Jenny, and a small team of officers organized a sting operation. They planned to approach the abandoned building carefully, surrounding it from multiple angles to avoid any chance of escape. The goal was to confront the men, gather evidence of their criminal activities, and shut down whatever operations they were running. Marcos, having heard about the plan, asked to come along. "I need to see this through," he insisted. "I need to know they're not going to bother anyone else." Alex hesitated. "This could be dangerous, Marcos. Are you sure?" Marcos nodded firmly. "I'm sure. I'll stay out of the way, but I need to be there." Seeing the determination in his eyes, Alex agreed, but only on the condition that Marcos stayed back until it was safe. "You stay close to me or Jenny, understood?" "Understood," Marcos agreed. As they approached the building, the tension was palpable. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, his senses on high alert. They moved in quietly, using the cover of the surrounding trees and the setting sun to mask their approach. From their vantage point, they could see a few figures moving inside the building. The men were there. On Alex's signal, the officers moved in, surrounding the building and blocking any potential exits. With guns drawn, they announced their presence. "Police, come out with your hands up." There was a moment of silence, followed by the sound of scrambling inside. One of the men burst out the front door, only to be immediately apprehended by Jenny and another officer. The others tried to flee through a back window, but they were quickly intercepted by the rest of the team. In the chaos, one of the men spotted Marcos, standing behind Alex, and sneered. "You think this changes anything, kid?" he spat. "You're nothing. You'll always be nothing." Before Alex could react, Marcos took a step forward, his voice steady and firm. "You're wrong," he said. "I'm not alone anymore, and I'm not scared of you." The man glared, but said nothing more as he was handcuffed and led away. Alex turned to Marcos, his eyes filled with pride. "You did good, kid," Marcos nodded, his expression a mix of relief and resolve. "I guess it's over now, huh?" "Yeah," Alex said, smiling. "For now, at least." With the men apprehended and their operation shut down, a sense of relief washed over the community. But for Alex, Marcos, and the others involved, it wasn't just about the immediate victory. It was about the foundation they had built, one of trust, support, and resilience. Marcos continued his work as a mentor, becoming a key figure in the community's youth programs. He still had challenges to face: his mother's ongoing health issues, the pressures of school and work. But he wasn't facing them alone anymore. He had allies, friends, and a community that cared. For Alex, the experience had been transformative. He had learned to see beyond his own biases, to listen more than he spoke, and to be a better officer and a better person. His bond with Marcos was a testament to the power of understanding, empathy, and the willingness to change. And so, as they stood side by side in the aftermath of the operation, both Alex and Marcos knew they were just getting started. There was still work to be done, but they were ready for it. Together, the recent victory over the men who had tried to coerce Marcos and other vulnerable kids into illegal activities marked a significant turning point for the community. While the threat had been neutralized for now, everyone involved knew that the fight wasn't over. If anything, it was just the beginning of a broader effort to reshape the neighborhood into a safer, more supportive place for everyone. Alex, Marcos, Jenny, and the rest of the community had come together to protect what mattered most, the future of their youth. But with this new chapter came new responsibilities, new challenges, and a deeper understanding of what it would take to maintain and build upon the progress they had made. Following the confrontation with the men at the abandoned building, Alex and Jenny decided it was time to expand the mentorship program that had been initiated a few weeks earlier. The program had already shown promise, with several young people stepping up to get involved, share their stories, and build meaningful connections with mentors. The next step was to scale it up and ensure that more kids like Marcos could benefit from it. At a community meeting held shortly after the sting operation, Jenny presented the plan for the program's expansion. "We've seen what a difference it makes when we come together as a community," she began, standing at the front of the room, filled with parents, community leaders, volunteers, and kids. "We've shown that we can stand up to those who want to bring us down. Now we need to make sure that every young person here has a chance to thrive, not just survive." She outlined the expanded program. Workshops focused on life skills, career planning, and emotional support, partnerships with local businesses to offer internships and job training, and increased involvement from social workers and mental health professionals to provide the necessary resources and guidance. Alex added his voice to the discussion. "We're not just talking about keeping kids out of trouble," he said. "We're talking about giving them real opportunities to grow, to learn, and to see a future for themselves that doesn't involve crime or fear. It's about breaking the cycle and building something better." Marcos, who had become more comfortable speaking at these gatherings, also stepped up to share his perspective. "I know how easy it is to feel like you don't have any choices," he said, his voice steady. "But we do have choices. We just need to know that people care, that they're willing to stand with us and show us the way. That's what this program can do." The community's response was overwhelmingly positive. More people volunteered to be mentors. Local businesses pledged to provide job training and internships, and donations started pouring in to support the new initiatives. It was clear that the events of the past few weeks had galvanized the community, creating a sense of unity and purpose that hadn't been there before. Alex and Jenny, along with other key community members, spent the next several weeks working tirelessly to turn these plans into action. They reached out to nearby schools, offering to partner with them on the workshops and mentorship programs. They also coordinated with local nonprofits and social services to provide comprehensive support for families in need, from financial aid to mental health counseling. For Marcos, this was more than just about making things safer for himself. He saw the impact his story had on others and felt a growing sense of responsibility to keep pushing for change. He became a regular speaker at community events, sharing his experiences and encouraging others to get involved. He knew that his journey wasn't over. His mother's health was still precarious, and balancing school, work, and his newfound role as a community leader was no easy task. But he was committed to seeing this through. As for Alex, his perspective on policing and his role in the community continued to evolve. The more he engaged with the community on this deeper level, the more he realized how much more there was to being a good cop than just enforcing the law. It was about understanding people, building trust, and being willing to learn from his mistakes. One day, after a particularly successful community workshop, Jenny approached Alex with a thoughtful expression. "You've changed, you know," she said, her tone half teasing but wholly sincere. "I remember when you first came to me with this whole Marcos thing. You were all about catching the bad guys." Alex chuckled. "Guess I had to learn the hard way that not everything's black and white. There's a lot of gray in this job and in life." Jenny nodded. "That's the truth. But you've done good, Alex. You've listened, you've learned, and you've made a difference. That's more than a lot of people can say." Alex appreciated her words, but he also knew there was Stein. With the mentorship program gaining traction, Marcos found himself taking on a new role as a youth leader and advocate. The other kids looked up to him, not just because of his story, but because he was real with them. He understood what they were going through, and he didn't sugarcoat the challenges. But he also showed them that there was a way out, a way to rise above. One day, after a particularly engaging workshop, where Marcos had spoken about the importance of finding your own path, a young girl approached him. She couldn't have been more than 14, her eyes wide and full of a mix of fear and hope. "Do you really think someone like me can make it?" she asked quietly. "My dad's gone, and my mom, she's working 2 jobs just to keep us fed. I don't see how things can get better." Marcos looked at her, seeing a reflection of his own struggles in her eyes. "I know it feels like that sometimes," he said gently. "But yeah, I think you can make it. And it's not just about what you can do. It's about all of us working together. That's why we're here." The girl nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thanks," she whispered. "I'm going to try." As she walked away, Alex, who had been watching from a distance, approached Marcos. "You're good at this, you know," he said, his voice filled with pride. Marcos shrugged, a little embarrassed. "I'm just trying to help," Alex smiled. "And you are, more than you know." As the weeks went by, the community began to see the fruits of their labor. Crime rates in the neighborhood started to decline, thanks in part to the increased vigilance of the Neighborhood Watch and the more substantial support networks that had been put in place. More importantly, there was a noticeable change in the atmosphere. People seemed more connected, more willing to look out for one another. To celebrate these small victories, the community decided to host a neighborhood fair. It was a way to bring everyone together, to enjoy the progress they had made, and to strengthen the bonds that had been formed. There were games, food stalls, music, and most importantly, a sense of joy and pride that filled the air. Marcos, who had been instrumental in helping to organize the event, was in high spirits. He moved around the fair with a sense of purpose, checking in with the kids he had been mentoring, making sure everyone was having a good time. His mother, who had been feeling better lately, thanks to the community's support, was there too, her smile wide as she watched her son thrive. Alex was there as well, enjoying the festivities and feeling a sense of fulfillment that went beyond his duties as a police officer. He watched as Jenny took a pie to the face in one of the games, laughing along with the crowd. He saw parents chatting with the officers they had once been wary of, sharing stories and laughs. It was moments like these that reminded him why he had joined the force in the first place. As the sun began to set and the fair started to wind down, Alex found himself standing with Marcos near one of the food stalls. "Look at this," Alex said, gesturing to the lively scene around them. "This is what it's all about." Marcos nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah, it's been a lot of work, but it feels worth it." Alex placed a hand on Marcos's shoulder. "You've done more than your fair share, kid. You've made a real difference here." Marcos looked up at him, his eyes filled with determination. It's just the beginning, right? We've got more work to do. Alex smiled, feeling a swell of pride and hope. That's right. And I'll be here with you every step of the way. The fair was just one night, but it symbolized so much more. It was a testament to what could be accomplished when people came together, when they chose to see each other not as enemies or strangers, but as neighbors, as friends, as family. It was a reminder that change was possible, but it required commitment, understanding, and a willingness to see the world through someone else's eyes. For Alex, it meant continuing to grow, to challenge his own biases, and to use his position to build bridges rather than barriers. For Marcos, it meant embracing his role as a leader, as someone who could inspire others and help them find their own paths. And for the community, it meant moving forward with renewed strength and unity, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead together.